Hello, everyone. Hello, you. Yes, you. Thank you for being on this podcast and listening to the magic, the creativity, and the value that these people that are on this podcast bring to the world. Everyone has unique value, a unique lens, a unique way of looking at the world. And it is my view solidly that it is when we explore and we provide space to express that we get to see the world in different ways. And collectively, when we explore this together, we expand our own thinking, our own creativity, our own ideas in this world. So why do I call this human business? Well, I do hold a solid belief that business is just a part of who we are. It's a place we express. It's a thing we do, but it ultimately is just expressing who we are. And in this podcast, I'm bringing to you people that are doing just that. That have this desire to express a message or a mission or a purpose or whatever you want to call it. There's just something that they want to express. And then they've converted that into what we call a business. So I call it a human business. And then if we have a look at what a human business is, each week we have a conversation with a creative entrepreneur focused on impacting humanity on purpose. Well, what does that even mean, right? Well, the intention of this podcast is to move and inspire humanity-led ideas. Humanity-led, like about people and about making a difference and about creating a kind of impact in the world. But we don't know what's possible when we go out there and express ourselves, like really, fully. Now, this intention is to create new and creative industry and abolish the BS that we have been fed, that you have to make money first, then you can make an impact. No, people are dying trying to make money first and never go out and express and create the impact that they really can make. So I want to inspire the premise to come first. You go make the impact and the money and abundance will flow. So me, Jess Claire, and my business, which is the #1 social media school for entrepreneurs, we believe that when you express what brings you joy and lights up what I call your genius, you will do both and easily. So join me as I talk to entrepreneurs and people creating these new industries, and we discuss and explore who they are and how they express their business. Hello, everyone. Jess Claire here, and today we're going to talk to the incredible Stephen Duns. He is a leadership expert. He does a number of leadership programs. He's a consultant, a facilitator, an educator in leadership. He's going to go and tell you a bit more about himself. But the thing that drew me to Stephen was he started talking about his sort of theories on leadership. And even today when we said what we're going to talk about, he said he wants to distinguish the difference between knowledge and skills and unlimited potential, how we identify our inner work versus our outer work. And I'm here with this guy because I was really inspired. I actually tried to sell him into one of my programs, and then I realized I just wanted to talk to him about his stuff. I'm still keen to get all of this stuff out there and amplify it. But yeah, I was just really inspired by who you were and how you think about things and the difference that you are making. So thank you for being here, Stephen.
Thank you, Jess. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And why don't you introduce yourself, and just add anything you'd like to add in terms of, how did you end up on this Human Business podcast?
Sure. Well, so I've had a pretty long career of doing the sort of climbing the ladder and ended up a number of CEO roles and enjoyed that. And then moved more across into the specialism of leadership and what does that mean? And then increasingly less interested in, as you said before, the skills and knowledge piece, and much more interested in the human development piece. I have a very fundamental belief in the unlimited potential of human development, and my goal in life is to work with people for them to realize as much of their potential as they can.
Yeah. And I think in our first conversation as well, you're talking about the inquiry.
Oh, yeah.
And that really got me, because I love the inquiry. Everything I do is about exploring, curiosity. Yeah. So can you tell everyone that's listening about this idea of the inquiry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of background to this. There's a whole world of stuff called appreciative inquiry, which is in the strengths-based place, which I love. But there's also within the world of coaching this idea that a lot of places are really focused on competencies. How do you be a good coach? What do you do to be a good coach? The behaviors, the abilities, the competencies. And then some people are talking a bit more about, well, that's sort of okay, but you can be technically proficient, but still not be a very good coach. And so they started talking about the capabilities that might be necessary for that to develop up. And that's fine. That there's capabilities. They start to think in more terms of systems. And then I and a group of people actually around the world are talking more about well, what about if you developed a coaching system based on the idea of inquiry, and perhaps even more deeply action inquiry, but really we're talking about developmental inquiry. And so what that means is that the coach and the coachee work together in an inquiry, and they use their relationship as part of a very Gestalt perspective, but their relationship as well as part of that inquiry. But there's no sense at all in which the coach has the answers. There is really the sense in which the coach works with the coachee in a space of inquiry for both to grow and develop.
Yeah. And so how is that different from what you would say is like traditional coaching? Because it's interesting you say that, because it does, when you say skills and knowledge versus unlimited potential, right? When I hear an inquiry versus sort of traditional coaching, if I have lots of skills as a coach, which I do, I have lots of brand and marketing and sales skills. I've also done transformational leadership. So I've got all these skills in what it is to transform people or views. So they're skills, right?
Yeah, and those skills are absolutely essential. And people develop mastery within those skills, and they're great. But there's something of that next step around saying, well, I mean, and even really, to be honest, the idea of inquiry can be regarded as a skill, and you become masterful in the way that you ask questions as well. But it's, there's some other stuff, I guess we talk about having the perspective around an ecosystem perspective. So it's not just around, so a lot of coaching is very much around, it's individualistic and behavioral. So it's around saying, if you set the right goals and do the right things, you'll succeed. And the reality is that it completely misses out on the idea of context and the systems within which the person is sitting. And then also this idea about, we talk about amusingly, humanizing the work environment. And this idea of saying, well, there are a whole heap of, what do you call it? I can't remember the word, but anyway, things in place that create things like discrimination, and so
biases.
Biases, unconscious biases as well, but that wasn't quite the word. But anyway, that doesn't matter. And so you need to be able to understand and work with those. Understand the extent to which you're influenced by those things. So the context becomes really critical. So no matter what your skills are, if you're not taking context, and the fact that people live in networks and work in networks, and we're in a networked world even more, increasingly, and so the coaching needs to take that up. So it's not just around the individual; it's the context and the ecosystem within which they work. And I would hope, I would encourage my coachees to be thinking about things like, well, what's my impact on that system, but also the broader system. What's my impact on the environment? What's my impact on the social environment as well as the natural environment, and so you sort of broaden those things out, rather than just saying, here's a goal, and think about the the obstacles and look at the what might be in the way and look at the ways forward. It's that's a very simplistic perspective on it, and I think that this idea. So that's one thing. The other thing is that as we talked a bit before, is about the inner work. It's about what is it within me that is potentially stopping me and indeed helping me do a whole range of things. But people, often they get to the stage where they've had a lot of success and they've used a whole range of skills or strengths to get them to where they are now. And then they've got to the stage where those strengths have actually become inhibitors for the next step. And so how do you work with people to say, I need to let go of this thing that's really helped me? Just an example of that is I was coaching an engineer a while ago, and he was miserable. He'd been relatively recently promoted, so he'd been an engineer for 21 years in this company and done really good work. And because he'd done such good work, they promoted him to be the manager. And so suddenly he wasn't doing engineering work anymore; he was doing management work. And the skills that made him be a fantastic engineer were actually quite disastrous for being a manager and a leader. And he hated it. He absolutely hated it. And in fact, interestingly enough, the short story is that he decided to go back and be an engineer. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to develop the new skills and the new strengths that he needed to do that. He wanted the comfort. So good for him. But he did that with a level of awareness, and didn't feel like a backward step. It felt like a conscious choice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just picking up on a couple of things you said there, because I think it's really cool to hone in on this. One of the things we talked about was the distinction between leadership and authority.
Yeah.
And right then you talked about context. Now, I must admit, I wasn't really aware of a context until I've been to a couple of courses now. One of the courses I did sort of went, context is the bowl and content is the fruit that's in the bowl. And you can move all the fruit around the bowl, but you got to really understand what is around the fruit to understand the context. That was one way of looking at it. Another course I did was like in the background. This is playing in the background. You don't even realize it's going on.
Yeah.
Like you're swimming in this water, and then you don't even realize you're in it until you like identify this context you're in. And then you're like, oh, no wonder I've been doing that. And your thinking, your actions, your everything is all aligned with this context that sometimes you don't even know is happening. So,
yeah.
How do you get to that? Like, how do you do the inner work to get to that?
Well, I mean, by asking good questions fundamentally, but, and also helping people become aware of that, and start to think about, well, an example for me is that, my personal example for me is that, I have, or perhaps had, but certainly occasionally still have, a tendency to respond with quite a lot of anger in situations. And so my go-to position was one of anger. And it worked for me. People don't like people being angry. And so they sort of try to placate you. And, because I'm, white, male, and articulate, I have a lot of power. I have often in the work I've done, I've been in positions of power. So I have all that privilege, that that unearned privilege that's sitting there. And so when someone like that gets angry, people try to placate them. But it wasn't healthy at all. And so the work that I did was around saying, well, what's going on for me there? And, we worked with the therapist, we worked through the whole idea around, well, so what's going on is actually I'm hurt from what happened to me in a whole range of times throughout my life. And so instead of facing up and dealing with that hurt, what I'm doing is I'm acting out with anger to try and avoid, showing that vulnerability and showing up as someone who's hurt, I'd rather show up as someone who's angry. So now, I think these days I'm much more aware of the fact that a lot of that anger comes from a place of hurt. And so I can have much more compassion for myself. And then I can, and so the anger becomes a bit less of a necessary escape, because I get it. That's what's going on. And so now I have choices around what response I want to make.
Yeah. So in you identifying as a context, there was this hurt or this incident that created this hurt, right?
Yeah.
The identification of that and kind of whatever it is, and understanding that, then means now when you experience that same reaction, you can choose to be different.
Yeah,
so you don't have to
exactly
react
right.
angry.
Yeah.
Now, this sounds extremely valuable for things, big things like domestic violence, and abuse, and bullying, and so this. And then, I mean, I really want to tie this into leadership versus authority, right? So how can this work impact those things?
Yeah, well, I think it has enormous potential to impact those things. If the perpetrator of domestic violence is acting out in relation to, and this, that they know that this is the case, that very often the victim becomes the perpetrator, then the possibility exists to work with that and allow them to make choices. And because there's this whole idea of what we call the subject-object distinction, which is that if I'm subject to that hurt, then I unconsciously and compulsively respond to that. And so for me, it was anger. Whereas when I become aware of that hurt and I treat it like an object, I can reflect on it. And then it gives me choices. I become choiceful about, okay, so what do I do with that? It doesn't mean the hurt goes away. It doesn't mean that I sort of suddenly, everything's roses and sunshine. It's really about saying, I accept the fact that, from a whole range of experiences in my life, I've been hurt. And so I can reflect on that and notice that in the moment, and certainly on reflection, and then have some more compassion for myself, have some more compassion for the people I'm with, and make different choices. And so that's a critical thing. And so that's, in some ways, that's a really interesting idea, because that idea of subject-object distinction is, in some ways, it's a skill, but it's much more than a skill. It's really a level of awareness that takes you from being subject to your anger, to your sadness, to your depression, to whatever it is, into the possibility of making choices, because you can reflect on it as an object. And that's a very powerful place to be, and powerful in actually the best sense of that word. So instead of being subject to something, you have the ability to treat it as an object. And so coming back to the authority and leadership, my belief is that a lot of people move into positions of authority as ways of avoiding some of those things, because it allows, once you're in control, it allows you to not have to face up to some of those things that might be going on for you. And then, that leads to a whole range of things. And so I think that, that there's a way of using inquiry to allow people to get to the space where they have that ability to treat something as an object rather than be subject to it.
Yeah. No, it's really great what you're saying, because I was just thinking of the times, anger was one of those things for me too. It was definitely this reaction and avoidance of something. And I know that, I mean, I never really thought of it as an inquiry, but I know that over the time I ended up going into these courses, because I'm like, okay, fine. They promise that they're going to give you whatever you want. And then you go into these courses and then they basically just give you access to all the stuff that's going on in your context. And one of the things that I got was, I think I never spoke to my dad not for many years. I think I've even talked about this in a podcast. And that was because he didn't give me something I wanted. And I decided and made this decision that he didn't care about me, right? Yeah. In this moment, because he didn't give me a lollipop or something, right? But then it played out in life when people didn't do certain things I expected. Exactly. It then plays out, and then I have this reaction to the hurt. And there was that actual hurt of, he did not get me this lollipop. I hadn't seen him for 6 weeks. As that's eventuated in life, I have an employee or a friend who happens to also work in the social media school, and, she'll do something or dismiss me. And the same thing shows up. It's like, you don't care. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And that we all have the need to be seen and to be heard. And if we have an experience in our life of not being seen or heard, that has a big impact on us.
And well, realistically, those things happen all the time, right? They don't they? So without the awareness, it can drive you crazy. So now I know that happens. And because she's, really great as well, what we end up doing is I just say to her, I'm really upset that you're not listening to me.
Yeah.
And because she also knows that none of it's got to do with her, she just goes, okay, I understand. And then sort of leaves me in my own experience of this, right? And then I know, just because of doing it so much, that I just allow myself to feel it and go, yeah, that hurts. Like, there's nothing for her to do. It just sometimes hurts. I name it, I kind of allow it, and then within about 5 minutes, it goes away.
Yeah, or it might not, but and that's okay as well. It's really you can own it. But as I say, if you can, a bit like you're starting to explain as well, if you can treat it as an object rather than be subject to it, it gives you more choices.
Yeah, I suppose. Okay, and maybe that's some of the work I've done is like just feel the hurt, and that kind of, I guess, that turns it into something. I guess that I can feel. I don't know. And then other ones have been like, distinguish what you're making it mean.
Yeah.
Like the meaning.
Yeah.
And doing the inquiry to actually ask.
Well, I mean, and that's a big part of my work is the way that we make meaning in the world, and adults develop and grow through stages, and the way they make meaning at different stages is different. And it's absolutely fascinating to work with people at different stages, because they have a very different view of the world, and and they also they make meaning in a completely different way. And there's one of the things that I have enormous satisfaction in is helping people see the world in a different way, and in a way that allows them to grow and develop. Yeah.
Yeah. You call it unlimited potential. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The unlimited potential of human development. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about how you got into this. So did you just wake up one day and say, I want to give people access to the world of unlimited potential of human development? It's not exactly something you just wake up and want to do.
Yeah. I guess it's it's both been something that's been with me for a long time, and also something that I've become more and more aware of over time. And so, like years ago when I was working as a CEO, I would often work with people, especially, executive assistants to whom I was really close, and work with them about what did they really want to do in life, because they didn't necessarily want to be my PA. So one example was I was working with a young woman, and she really wanted to do massage. And so she went off and did the massage course. And in the end, she became the principal masseur or masseuse for the Royal Ballet Company.
Oh, wow.
Through other connections I had. And so, that for me is a beautiful story of someone who's really starting to live their dream. And it was a great joy to me to be able to just do a couple of little things that helped her get along the way in that journey. So that was a long time ago, and that was literally when I was about 30. So that's a long time ago. Whereas, and then I did my doctorate. My doctorate was all around what can we learn from quantum and complexity theory for leadership, and that moved me to a different direction. I found out about the world of human development, and I'm completely intrigued by it. And so, it was very much in the space of leadership development. I think my interest has broadened out to human development and not just leadership development. But and so, a bit like you, I've been on loads of courses. I went and learned about spiral dynamics and Bob Kegan's work, and now the Heart Hill stuff, and
did you say Gestalt? Did I hear you say Gestalt?
Yeah, the Gestalt's I guess a part of the whole picture about how, within the coaching environment, how you can use your relationship with the coachee as a learning platform. Yeah, I think there's a sort of a microcosm or a microcosm of what might be going on in other places, a fractal of their broader world.
Yeah. So you go off and do all these courses, but when was that moment? Because this is the Human Business Podcast, and some of the people that listen to this are in jobs wanting to take the leap, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's so comfortable.
Sadly, I don't
Not
have the answer for that. I think there was, I had a job for a while, and relatively recently I had a job for a while just working on leadership development, and I did even more work, got more experience in working with people, and that's where I came across the Harthill leadership development profile, and stages of leadership development, which is based on stages of human development, and I'm I love all of that work, and also this idea of how do we this idea of what we call vertical development, and which requires three things: a heat experience. So something that gets us outside our comfort zone, colliding perspectives, a whole range of different views on what's going on, and then some space for reflection. And so those three core things are really important, and that's absolutely critical for a coaching relationship as well. But it's how do you put yourselves in situations that are really uncomfortable, where you're hearing all these things of different perspectives that are blow your mind up, and then give yourself some time to reflect on all of that. That's a really powerful developmental path. And so it's around saying, well, how can I create situations like that? And so my coaching practice is not a comfortable one. People don't find it fun.
No.
It's really working to give them that heat experience, and some people love it, and some people find it really difficult and don't want to do it, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because now you're talking about that kind of experience, right? And what I said to you before we came on to the podcast was, you've actually developed this sort of product, this leadership product. You've developed these programs, and you're getting the work that you need through these programs. And I said, well, I need to create a problem for you, and I know, because it's part of it. I need to in order to develop and grow, you have to create what I call like this intentional chaos.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of sift and sort and be with and identify and then reflect on all of it, so that you can take yourself up to the next level.
Yeah.
And in my case, it's social media. I mean, that in itself, if you want to go and look at all different perspectives and have people throwing opinions, you have to do is just scroll for a bit.
Yeah, the problem with social media, I find, is that there's not much reflection going on. There's a lot of colliding perspectives. There's people screaming at each other with opinions, but not a lot of real analysis or reflection on what the other person is saying.
No, I agree. That's actually why I try and create my shows as explorations and curiosity, as opposed to just, throwing into the mix another sort of like what I call this kind of righteous battle. Yeah. Battle of the righteousness. Yeah, absolutely. But so I really want to dig into a bit more of you, Stephen.
Sure.
I don't know that I set you up for this, but seeing as though you're into this sort of work, I'm sure you'll be okay. So in your life, what was the most, because I know when I dig in, there's always these real pivotal moments where people are like, I really want to make this about people, human development, like I call it, humanity-led. What was that moment for you? There's usually a moment or something happens in your life where you're like, this is what I want to make a difference.
Yeah. So a good term for those is crucible moments. I think one of them that was very early on, again, it was just after I finished university. I had the choice of two jobs. And I just, for all sorts of reasons we don't need to go into, I was qualified as a wool classer. Because I love...
What's a wool classer?
Well, someone who classifies the quality of the wool.
Oh, okay, getcha.
In a shearing shed. Because I love farms and farming, and I live on a farm and all that sort of stuff. So that's, and I had the opportunity of going to a job with a big firm that dealt with wool. I can't remember exactly what it was now. Or I had the option, and I had another option of becoming a youth worker. And it was a really interesting choice, and it became really obvious to me that at that stage that actually the youth worker was the really clear choice for me, because that was really about working with young people in a way that allowed them to grow and develop. And I loved that work. I absolutely loved it. And I have no question that I made the right choice. But that, in a sense, led me then on a path down that whole sort of community support, community service type world, which I really enjoy. So that was a crucible moment for me in making that choice.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, along the way, then I guess I did other things. I did feel as though there was a time when I got involved in consulting, and I was working for one of the big four, and I suddenly realized, this stuff, I really don't care. And I had this really sort of quite embarrassing moment with the guy who was managing me, and he said, "Look, Stephen, you got all this stuff going on, but it's just you're not doing stuff. You're not doing what you need to do." And I looked at him. I said, "Yeah, you're right, and I don't want to."
What was it that you were doing?
Well, I was working with, I was working in one of the big consulting firms, and I was doing work with the Commonwealth Bank. I was doing work with an insurance company over in New Zealand, and I was doing some work with around real estate, and I just didn't care about any of it. It did not float my boat in any way, and so I was being paid a bucket load of money, and I was, so in a sense I was using my skills, and the clients all loved me, but there was nothing in it, and so I decided to retire, and that was when I was 42. And I had a ball. I went and worked on my vineyard for about 6 months, and it was really nice. And then I was doing all sorts of voluntary stuff. I was the chair of the Human Research Ethics Committee at Austin Health, and that was quite a busy role, even though it was voluntary. And but then I got bored, and I decided I wanted to go back to work. And at that stage, I decided, right, now I'm going to go and do some work that I love. I don't care how much I get paid. I don't care about the title and all that sort of stuff. And I did, and I went and worked in actually for a local government in leisure and community services. And once again, it was just one of the most fun things I ever did. And so that's been for me, has been, whenever I take a job now, it's because it's what I want to do. When I do work, and I do lots of different work at the moment. I don't just work just for myself. I do some work for myself. But I have what I call a portfolio of work, and I choose what goes into that portfolio based on to what extent does that allow me to live this world of contributing to the unlimited potential of human development.
Yeah. And I think it takes that moment, doesn't it, where you said you're working, you're getting paid a bucket load of money. You kind of get to the point where you've got, well, some people get to it in different ways, but you got to it as a white middle-class male, or upper-class male in some way, like a corporate male. You're getting C-level positions. You now reached the top, and you're bored. Yeah. And this isn't what you want to do. And then someone taps you on the shoulder and goes, "Why are you even here?" And you're like, "I don't even know. Just somehow I ended up here." And then you stop and you go, "I'm never doing that again." Because it doesn't fulfill that kind of, I guess, soul in us, or whatever you want to call it. There's just something to fulfill. Yeah. And then you went, sorry, you go.
No, you should be doing stuff that enlivens your spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. And for you, it was that fulfilling on human or unlimited human potential, right? Yeah. How do I bring more of that out into the world? And then so you went off and did that. And it's interesting, different people get to it in different ways, like sometimes it's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
I had a breakdown in my marriage, and I didn't see my kids for months, and I had all these things happen. It's just like crash, boom, right? I lost my job at something I really loved, like all of it just sort of crashed down. And then I call it like this some people call it the dark night of the soul. Have you ever heard that term?
Yeah.
I'd never heard it until I was in it, because I was like, I don't know what's happening, but apparently I'm going to rebirth, right? But for you, it may not have been like that. Was it like that for you at the time?
Nah, not really. Not really. It was. I just made a decision that I'd let go of my purpose. for a while, and I just needed to get back on track. So I didn't go through the big dark moment, night of the soul. But it is interesting that they talk about in terms of stages of human development, and I mean they literally mean about we change the way our brain works. It's a whole cognitive as well as perspective. Is that big life conditions, events contribute to that in a big way. So all of those things that you said, sometimes that was all at once to people, and that has a huge impact. But sometimes it's just one thing. It might just be the death of a loved one. It might be a health scare. It can be just a sort of this suddenly realizing I am bored to tears with this and I need to do something else. So those life conditions, that life events and changes in life condition have a big impact on our development.
Yeah. At some level, I feel like, I'm kind of making this up and there's no real evidence of it per se, but people do talk about it. It does seem like there is some sort of path, like there seems something I'm sort of called to do. And then if I'm not on track, it's almost like the universe presents you with these big problems. Like, well, if you're not on track, I'm going to throw in a breakup. You're not really with the person you really want to be with anyway. So we'll kind of force you out of it. And not that sort of puts me somehow at a distance from it, which isn't the case at all. But it just seems as though if you don't listen, the universe will throw things at you. So you do. Whereas, yeah.
So, my belief system is pretty much aligned with that. I think life throws stuff at you, we make choices about how we respond to that. One of the core shifts in this idea of meaning making is that at one level, what happens outside us has a huge impact on us, and our internal state will be determined by what happens outside. At the next level, which they call self-authoring, we become clear about what's important to us, our values, our purpose, and so we respond to what happens outside from that space. And so instead of our internal space being determined by what's happening outside, what happened outside is interpreted through what's going on inside. And that's sort of the inside out perspective. And it's a much healthier place to be and completely liberating. Yeah.
Interesting. That would say that was a switch for me. And it sounds like it was a switch for you too.
Yeah.
Where you guys switch from, what would you call it? If you're not self-authoring, what are you doing?
Socialized.
So things are happening and, breakups, not seeing, your kids, or someone dies, so there's a death close to you, or you might get unwell, or you might have some sort of health condition where you can't do things. You might lose a lot of money, like someone steals money off you. I've got someone close to me at the moment that has lost like $100,000 during COVID due to some scam. These things sort of happen. And what I find interesting is once people kind of get through that, it's almost like the switch to self-authoring. It's like you kind of get to a place where you're like, screw it, you can't help all these things happening, so I'm going to have a great life anyway.
Well, it can be that the thing that but sometimes people dig in and become even more, they blame others, justify what's going on and deny what's going on. So it depends. So it can be an event that goes to development, but it's not necessarily. They talk about only about a third of people go beyond the socialized development stage. So 2/3 of people right up into adulthood and death are still living in that socialized space. They're still, what's going on inside for them is determined what's happening outside. And it really, there's not a lot of personal power in that space.
No, there's not. And so what would you, I imagine even people listening to this podcast, right? They're probably going to be in that space. They're either close to or wanting to step into that sort of, like you call it, the self-authoring space. Like, I'm jumping in. I even say the moment for me was when I went, I don't care if I live in a van. I never have, and I've always had a lot of money, but it's always, I don't care if I do, because I'm going to work out how to really live this purpose and find a way to create an abundance that goes with it. You know, and just doing that has been super fun.
Yeah.
And so what would you say to people that are kind of like teetering in corporate like you or in any job and wanting to sort of jump over?
I tell them to find a coach that knows what
knows inquiry.
That's right. But yeah, I mean, it really is. So, you know, what's fascinating is that, you know, there's this work of a guy called Doug Silsby, who's a great story, beautiful man. But he talked about the fact that as a species, we have this sort of right from birth, this innate drive to learn. And, you know, we're always learning. We learn how to walk, we learn how to talk. We're constantly learning about the world around us. And that never goes away. That's an innate drive. And then as we learn, we develop and we start to embody what we learn. And so one of the interesting things is that then when you ask people to change, we think about, well, just change your behavior. But actually what you're telling them to do is to change their identity. Because once we've embodied that learning, that becomes part of our identity. And so, you know, people say, you know, we're resistant to change, and that can often be the case, but that's because we think we're asking nothing, just change some behavior, you know, just changing your job description a little bit. But actually, what we're really doing is asking people to change their identity. That's a major ask. And so you need to do that in a very different way. You need to be, you know, much more sensitive and much more interested, I think, in people to about what their identity is and what it means for them in order for them to be able to make that shift.
Yeah, that's actually very, very good point. One of the courses I did talked about exactly what you're saying, but I don't know that they put it in the words you did. I think it's your access to impacting your relationships is really understanding how the world looks from their perspective.
Yeah, well, that's just empathy, but yeah.
Yeah, like really, even I find, you know, after all the work I've done, I don't always do that well. I'm like, no, look at my perspective. You know, it's still this tendency to want people to understand me, you know. So it's a real skill.
You still want to be seen. You still want the lollipop.
Want that lollipop. My dad eventually, I told him about it, you know, after I did all the work, and he bought me like 7 lollipops. Yeah. It was so cute.
Yeah, but it's true. And you know, we all have that, whatever it is. We need to be seen, we need to be heard. And that's a fundamental need, I think, a human need.
Yeah, and being seen, it's something that I'm really passionate about, is seeing others. And also getting myself seen as well. I make sort of no apologies to work out ways in which I can communicate so I get seen. But it's there's an experience that comes with being fully seen.
Absolutely.
That's different from getting attention.
Oh yeah. You know, look, I mean, there's someone, I was listening to someone the other day saying that it's one of the problems with the Zoom environment at the moment. There is a difference between being seen and being watched. And so, you know, I think there's some real challenges for people leading in the online space, and one of them is to take the time and the energy to really see someone on the screen rather than just watch them. And it's a real challenge, and it's going to be, I think, you know, it's going to be a challenge that'll sit around with us for a while, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being on this podcast and sharing your experience, your journey, and the work that you're doing to unlock unlimited potential in everyone that you come across, and you continue the work. If people do want to find out about Stephen as well, his website is the tlcgroup.com.au. What does that stand for again?
The Leadership Center.
The Leadership Center, TLC Group.
It's also Tender Loving Care.
Yeah, I love it. So the link will be in the notes of this podcast. And he also is involved in a group of people that do the art of hosting. There's a website called the Art of Hosting. You run events to have people get more masterful at that inquiry. Is that what that is about as well? Yeah,
it's actually, the full title is The Art of Hosting and Harvesting Conversations That Matter.
Yes.
So it's really about facilitating groups of people in a way that all the voices get heard. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And you mentioned it to me, so I'm interested in it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So anyone wants to continue to engage with Stephen, that's how you will, and the work that he's doing. Other than that, thank you so much, Stephen, for being a part of this.
Thank you, Jess. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes. And are there any other Instagram, LinkedIn? You can get you on LinkedIn, can't you?
LinkedIn, yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn.
He's all over
Instagram,
LinkedIn.
I don't know that I've even got an account for Instagram. Maybe
I'm working on that. We're working on that. I'm going to get him in my immersion. I got to get this work out there. He's too comfortable. Okay. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thanks for being a part of this.
Thanks, Jess. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Human Business Podcast and exploring new and creative ideas, exploring the people creating these new and creative ideas for humanity-led business. If you have any questions or you want to know any more information, or even if you have some ideas, please do get in contact with me. I do love hearing from you. If you would like to follow me, my Instagram is the Jess Claire Group. Remember, Claire is with no E, Clair. I have a Facebook page, the Jess Claire Group as well. And please do join Humanity-Led Business Group on Facebook, which is called Human Business Collective. Would love to see you on there. Would love to hear from you. And thanks again for tuning in. Until next week, goodbye.